On a cold January morning in 1962, at Naples International Airport, a man named Charles Luciano collapsed. His heart, after a lifetime of relentless ambition and calculated ruthlessness, finally gave out. Yet, the empire he built, the American Mafia, would beat on for decades, a testament to the ruthless genius who, from the squalid streets of New York, forged a shadow government that reshaped a nation. His name, etched in the annals of crime, became synonymous with power, order, and an unseen hand that guided the underworld. How did a penniless Sicilian immigrant become the undisputed architect of organized crime in America? A figure whose influence resonated far beyond the dark alleys and smoke-filled rooms, touching the very fabric of society and even the course of a world war. This is the story of Salvatore Lucania, the boy who became Lucky Luciano. Our journey begins not in the bustling, unforgiving concrete jungle of New York, but under the ancient, sun-drenched skies of La Cara Friddi, a small, impoverished village nestled in the heart of Sicily. Here, in 1897, Salvatore Lucania was born into a world defined by scarcity and the iron grip of tradition. The air was thick with the scent of olive groves and dust, and life was a constant struggle against the unforgiving land. His family, like so many others, toiled endlessly, their days marked by hunger and the gnawing desperation for a better tomorrow. Salvatore witnessed firsthand the stark realities of survival, the subtle dance of power and submission that governed village life, and the deep-seated distrust of authority that permeated the culture. These early lessons, absorbed through the very pores of his young existence, would later become the bedrock of his criminal philosophy. The dream of America, a land of boundless opportunity, shimmered like a mirage across the vast ocean. For the Lucania family, it was a desperate gamble, a last hope to escape the grinding poverty that threatened to consume them. In 1906, at the tender age of 9, Salvatore, clutching his mother's hand, stepped onto the crowded deck of a steamship, leaving behind the familiar contours of his homeland for the unknown. The voyage was long, arduous, and filled with the anxieties of a new beginning. When the ship finally docked in the bustling, chaotic port of New York, the sights, sounds, and smells of the Lower East Side hit them like a physical blow. It was a cacophony of languages, a kaleidoscope of cultures, and a brutal awakening to a reality far harsher than any they had imagined. Instead of streets paved with gold, they found crowded tenements, rampant disease, and the cold indifference of a society that viewed them as little more than cheap labor. Salvatore's formal education was fleeting, a mere flicker in the harsh glare of necessity. The streets became his true classroom, and survival his most urgent lesson. He quickly learned that in this new world, the old rules of respect and tradition often gave way to brute force and cunning. He dropped out of school, his young mind already sharp and observant, and plunged headfirst into the vibrant, dangerous currents of street life. He ran with other immigrant boys, a motley crew of Italians, Jews, and Irish, all fighting for scraps in a city that offered little. It was here, in the alleys and on the stoops, that he first encountered Meyer Lansky, a brilliant, calculating Jewish boy, and Frank Costello, a smooth-talking, ambitious Italian. These two would become his lifelong confidants, his most trusted allies, and the intellectual and diplomatic pillars of his future empire. Together, they formed a formidable trio, their diverse skills complementing each other perfectly. Salvatore's early ventures into petty crime were marked by a shrewdness that belied his age. He wasn't content with merely stealing. He sought to organize. One infamous tale recounts his method of extorting protection money from smaller Jewish boys. He would offer them a choice: pay him 10 cents a week, and he would guarantee their safety from bigger bullies, or refuse, and he would personally beat them up. His logic was simple, brutal, and undeniably effective. It was during this period, after a particularly brutal beating by a rival gang that left him with a drooping eyelid and a scar, that the nickname Lucky began to stick. Not lucky for avoiding the beating, but lucky for surviving it, for emerging from every scrape with an uncanny resilience. He joined the notorious 5 Points gang, a melting pot of young toughs, and quickly rose through its ranks, learning the intricate dance of street power. He absorbed lessons from older, more established figures, like Arnold Rothstein, the legendary Jewish gambler and fixer, who taught him the value of organization, discretion, and the cold, hard logic of business in the criminal underworld. Luciano wasn't just a brawler, he was a thinker, a strategist who saw beyond the immediate score to the larger game. The year, 1920, brought with it a seismic shift that would forever alter the landscape of American crime, the Volstead Act, ushering in the era of Prohibition. What the government intended as a moral crusade, Luciano and his contemporaries saw as an unprecedented opportunity, a river of gold flowing directly into their pockets. The demand for alcohol didn't vanish. It simply went underground, creating a vacuum that organized crime was perfectly positioned to fill. Luciano's vision was revolutionary. He sought to move beyond the fragmented, ethnically divided street gangs of the past and forge a unified, business-oriented criminal enterprise. He recognized that the old ways of the Mustache Petes, the traditional, old-world Sicilian bosses who clung to antiquated customs and feuds, were inefficient and detrimental to profit. He envisioned a syndicate built on cooperation, efficiency, and diversification, with Lansky providing the financial acumen and strategic planning, and Costello leveraging his charm and political connections. Luciano rapidly expanded his operations. Bootlegging became a highly sophisticated industry, involving vast networks of distilleries, transportation routes, and distribution channels. Speakeasies, hidden behind innocuous storefronts, proliferated across the city, becoming glamorous havens for those seeking illicit pleasures. But Luciano's empire wasn't limited to alcohol. He diversified into gambling, running high-stakes card games and illegal casinos, and into prostitution, controlling vast networks of brothels. His enterprises were run with a cold, corporate efficiency, each branch operating like a well-oiled machine, generating immense wealth. The Young Turks, as Luciano and his ambitious peers were known, embraced modernity, technology, and a ruthless pragmatism that shocked the old guard. They dressed in expensive suits, drove luxurious cars, and frequented the most exclusive clubs, living a life of opulent excess, yet always with an underlying current of danger. The stakes were incredibly high, and betrayal lurked in every shadow. This clash between the old and new worlds inevitably erupted into open warfare. The Castellamarese War, a brutal, bloody conflict that raged from 1930 to 1931, pitted the traditionalist forces of Joe Masseria, known as the Boss, against the more progressive, yet equally ruthless, Salvatore Maranzano, a recent arrival from Sicily. Luciano, ever the pragmatist, initially played both sides, feigning loyalty to Masseria, while secretly aligning himself with Maranzano. He saw the war as a destructive force, a drain on resources, and a threat to the stability he craved for his burgeoning empire. He grew increasingly frustrated with the old boss's stubborn adherence to outdated customs, their endless feuds, and their inability to see the bigger picture. They were, in his eyes, obstacles to progress, relics of a bygone era that needed to be swept aside. Luciano made a cold, calculated decision. He would end the war, not by choosing a side, but by eliminating both leaders. First, he orchestrated the assassination of Joe Masseria. On the 15th of April, 1931, Masseria was lured to a Coney Island restaurant for a supposed dinner meeting with Luciano. While Luciano excused himself to the restroom, a hit squad, reportedly including Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Albert Anastasia, stormed in and gunned down Masseria. The message was clear. The old ways were dead. Maranzano, believing he had won, declared himself boss of bosses and attempted to consolidate power, outlining a rigid hierarchy that mirrored the Sicilian Mafia. But Luciano saw Maranzano as just another Mustache Pete, another obstacle to his vision of a truly modern, Americanized syndicate. Maranzano even drew up a list of those he intended to eliminate, with Luciano's name prominently featured. Luciano acted swiftly and decisively. On the 10th of September 1931, Maranzano was ambushed in his Park Avenue office by a group of Jewish hitmen disguised as government agents, reportedly led by Samuel Red Levine and Bo Weinberg, sent by Lansky and Luciano. The night of the Sicilian Vespers, as it became known, marked the definitive end of the old guard's dominance. With both Masseria and Maranzano eliminated, the path was clear for Luciano to implement his grand vision. The Commission. This revolutionary governing body, comprised of the heads of the 5 New York families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo, and representatives from other major crime families across the nation, was designed to prevent future internecine wars, media disputes, and ensure the smooth, profitable operation of the entire criminal enterprise. It was a true corporate structure for organized crime, a national syndicate that transcended ethnic boundaries, even including powerful Jewish and Irish gangsters like Lansky and Bugsy Siegel in its broader network. Luciano, though rarely seen in the public eye, was the undisputed chairman, the unseen hand, guiding the destiny of the American underworld. This was the zenith of his power, the culmination of his ruthless ambition and strategic genius. But even the most powerful empires are vulnerable to the relentless march of justice. Thomas E. Dewey, a tenacious and ambitious special prosecutor, set his sights on Luciano. Dewey, a man of unwavering resolve, saw Luciano not just as a criminal, but as a symbol of the corruption that plagued New York. His investigation meticulously uncovered Luciano's vast prostitution ring, a network of brothels and call girls that generated immense profits. Despite Luciano's sophisticated layers of protection and his carefully cultivated image as a legitimate businessman, Dewey built an ironclad case. In 1936, Luciano was arrested, charged with compulsory prostitution and operating a statewide prostitution racket. The trial was a sensation, a dramatic clash between the forces of law and order and the shadowy king of the underworld. Luciano, once seemingly untouchable, was convicted and sentenced to a staggering 30 to 50 years in state prison. The man nicknamed Lucky found himself behind the cold, unforgiving bars of Sing Sing, and later, the maximum security Dannemora, a stark testament to the fragility of even the most absolute power. Yet, even from his cell, his influence lingered. His lieutenants still sought his counsel, and the commission he created continued to operate, a testament to its robust design. The outbreak of World War II, however, brought an unexpected twist to Luciano's fate. As the United States entered the global conflict, fears mounted about Axis sabotage in New York Harbor, a vital artery for Allied shipping. The U.S. Navy, desperate to secure the docks and prevent espionage, found itself in an unlikely alliance. Operation Underworld. They turned to the one man who held sway over the waterfront, the one man whose connections could guarantee security. Lucky Luciano. From his prison cell, Luciano, through his intermediaries, agreed to cooperate. His network of contacts among dock workers and longshoremen was mobilized, ensuring the safety of ships and identifying potential saboteurs. The deal was a Faustian bargain. In exchange for his invaluable assistance, Luciano's sentence would be commuted, and he would be deported to Italy after the war. The irony was palpable. The man who had built an empire on illicit activities was now aiding his country in its darkest hour, a testament to his pragmatic patriotism, or perhaps simply his enduring desire for freedom. In 1946, after a decade in prison, Luciano was released and immediately deported to Italy. The sight of the Statue of Liberty receding into the distance must have been a bitter pill to swallow. He had built his empire in America, and now he was banished from the land that had given him both his greatest triumphs and his most crushing defeat. He settled in Italy, first in Sicily, then in Naples, a city that offered a familiar blend of chaos and charm. He attempted to re-establish his control over the American Mafia from abroad, famously convening the Havana Conference in Cuba in 1946, a gathering of the most powerful crime bosses, including his old friend Meyer Lansky and even Frank Sinatra. But the American authorities, wary of his continued influence, pressured Cuba to expel him, and his attempts to pull the strings from afar were largely thwarted. He lived under constant surveillance, a king without a kingdom, a general without an army, haunted by the memory of the power he once wielded. He longed for America, the vibrant, dynamic country where he had forged his legend, but it remained forever out of reach. On that fateful January day in 1962, at Naples International Airport, Luciano was meeting with a film producer about a movie based on his life. Perhaps he was contemplating his legacy, the cinematic sweep of his extraordinary journey. But his heart, after enduring so much, finally gave out. He collapsed, a solitary figure in a bustling terminal, far from the streets where he had first learned to survive, far from the empire he had so meticulously constructed. His death, though quiet, was not without ceremony. His body was flown back to New York, the city he loved and conquered, and his funeral was a grand affair, attended by hundreds of mourners, a final, poignant display of the enduring respect and fear he commanded. He was buried in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, not far from the very neighborhoods where his legend began. Lucky Luciano's legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of ruthlessness, genius, and an undeniable impact on American history. He transformed organized crime from a collection of disparate, warring street gangs into a sophisticated national enterprise, a shadow government with its own laws, its own courts, and its own enforcement mechanisms. The Commission, his crowning achievement, brought an unprecedented level of order and stability to the underworld, allowing it to flourish and diversify for decades after his death. He was a criminal, undeniably, responsible for countless acts of violence and exploitation. Yet, he was also a visionary, a strategic mastermind who understood the power of organization, the importance of diplomacy, and the cold, hard logic of business. His story is a chilling reminder of the allure of power, the seductive pull of ambition, and the enduring human capacity for both profound evil and extraordinary ingenuity. He may have died in exile, but the shadow of Lucky Luciano, the architect of shadows, continues to stretch long and dark across the landscape of American crime, a testament to the man who changed the game forever.